Early civilizations in South America. The objectives are: 1. Describe the well-organized materialistic empire of the Inca, and 2. Summarize how Incan communities undertook sophisticated building projects and established a high level of culture and cultural development. Now, in terms of the region and the early civilizations that developed along that same Peruvian western coast of South America, you have Caral, which is located in Peru, and this has been identified as the oldest major city in the Americas, anywhere perhaps, abandoned somewhere around 2000 to 1500 BCE. Now we see there buildings that included apartment complexes, grand residences, complex irrigation systems. Now, we know very little about this civilization, but we can see that from very early on, there were attempts at establishing a complicated civilization through their cities and through their networks. Well, somewhere around 200 BCE, another advanced civilization arose, and that appeared near the Pacific coast, near Ecuador, along the Moche River. And because we don't really know who these people really were, we refer to them as the Moche. Now, it seems that what their staples, in terms of dietary staples, were maize, corn, peanuts, potatoes, cotton, of course. So this early civilization had, of course, the resources to survive and to thrive, but the Moche had no written language. We have a little bit of pottery that implies the dominance of warfare, that particularly of prisoners and sacrificial victims. The trend of human sacrifice still remains kind of present. But again, without the presence of the written language, we rely completely on artifacts and archaeological analysis. But nevertheless, this Moche people had arisen in that same region. Now, when we really speak about South American civilizations, the only one that we really can speak of quite thoroughly are the Inca. Now, after the Moche civilization, the kingdom of Timor emerged, only to be replaced by the Inca. Now, really, this is in the late 1300s. The Inca were a small community in the area of Cusco. But over time, a powerful ruler named Pachacuti launched a campaign of conquest to solidify his control over the region and put the entire region underneath his dominance. And this was the birth of the Incan Empire. Now, his immediate successors extended the borders of the empire as far as Ecuador, central Chile, the edge of the Amazon basin. So they do inevitably kind of extend this political boundary and this political empire to something we might be more familiar with in other civilizations. All young men were required to serve in the Incan army. And of course, this implies a very militaristic society in general. And they used this military system to create a well-organized empire, divided into 4 quarters, governed and ruled by particular individuals, governors, under whom you end up having division of control and labor. But in this system, then, they can all be managers to the king, and the king can then control things from his position. Now, the emperor was believed to have descended from the gods, and we see this trend similarly in other places, ancient Egypt, for example, where he's a quasi-deity. So not only is he connected and close to the gods, but he may even be a god himself. So this is really a source of authority that we're going to see a pattern throughout all human history, that the rulers connect and claim to be connected to the gods, which gives them authority to tell everyone to listen to them. Now, all Incan subjects were responsible for labor service. Everyone was required to labor in some sense for the community. building roads. Usually 25,000 miles collectively were made in this region. But there were other projects as well, not just road making. And these roads extended from modern-day Colombia to Chile, interconnecting this Incan Empire, which, of course, roads mean the ability to travel, the increase in trade, and an easier way for military to be conveyed to one region to another. Now, in terms of social structure, the Incan society was highly regimented. Marriage was confined, and for particular social groups, of course, only certain people could marry with others. Many lived in farming communities and homes built of stone and adobe. And in fact, like we see in most history, the silent people are the majority. That is, farmers and laborers are the majority of humans in our stories. But we don't know their stories very well because we only hear the small minority, the elite. But nevertheless, we see that the majority of these people were living in farming communities. Now, of course, geographically, this is problematic to sustain a large empire and a huge population. So you end up having terraced farms watered by irrigation, where there's no huge open land, and so creating steps up sides of mountains where you have portions of flat land. But the entire thing is not a giant flat plain, and so a little bit different approach to farming that suits the geographical context. You also have massive building projects. Structures were built of close-fitting stone with really no mortar, which is incredibly complicated. Some of the stones cut are huge and would, in fact, for most modern industry, require cranes to put them in place. But of course, this was the solution for the frequency of earthquakes. With no mortar, it allowed the rocks to wiggle and give room, but they were so precise in their cutting that it allowed for an intricate interlocking sort of system for the rocks to stay in place, for the walls to stay in place. Now, one of the most impressive city structures ever built, perhaps ever, but certainly among the Inca, was Machu Picchu. It was built on a lofty hilltop surrounded by mountain peaks, about 8,000 feet high. It's dramatic, and it's in fact one of the number one archaeological and architectural destinations for most people with a bent toward history. And so what's impressive, though, about all this is the Inca had no writing system. That is, that how one does mathematical calculations even to do these complex tasks. Now, how they kept records and how they did mathematics was a system of knotted strings called the quipu. And it's quite impressive that they were able to do this in a sort of mathematical image of how to express these numbers. But however this system worked, it certainly did. And they were undoubtedly one of the most advanced civilizations of the region. Now, inevitably, of course, when the Spaniards come, while the Incan Empire was flourishing, we end up seeing that it collapses under its own weight and of the Spanish incursion. So the Incan Empire was, in fact, still flourishing by the 16th century when that Spaniard conquistador, Francisco Pizarro, and his 180 men emerged in Peru. Now, of course, the thing that really destroyed the civilization and destroyed most Native American civilizations was disease. An epidemic of smallpox devastated the civilization. Now, of course, we have to be careful here because the Spanish don't know about bacteria. They don't know about diseases in the sense that we talk about them. And so the introduction of smallpox is something that's inadvertent through just exposure between the closed-off Western world and the closed-off American world. So we end up seeing this devastating disease spread through the region. Now, the empire fell into, of course, civil war, during which Pizarro exploited the chaos and conquered the region. which is typical. This is the same scenario that we see with Hernan Cortez among the Aztec as well. The objectives were: 1. Describe the well-organized militaristic empire of the Inca, and 2, summarize how Incan communities undertook sophisticated building projects and established a high level of culture and cultural development.